Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is that you're watching this. And what you're watching is called What's Left. I'm your host. My name's Larry Erickson. And for the next somewhere close to half an hour, I'm going to be talking about some things that I think are worthy of your time. And I hope that you'll agree with me on that and stick with me for this time. If you have any reactions to the show, as always, you can send them to me directly. This is my personal email here, huviating@aol.com. And if you didn't catch that, you can go to my website. It's called Lotus Surviving a Dark Time. The URL will be over here a couple of times during the show. You can get the email address from there if you didn't catch it now, or you can leave a comment there if you'd rather do it that way. If you do send me email, just two requests, as always. Include something in the subject line that makes it clear it's about the show, this is not spam, and be a little patient about getting an answer. Okay, so with that, let's get going. I always like to start with good news when I can, to start every show with some good news. So this is something that actually happened in January, but I only heard about it this past week, so I'm going to include it here. The state of New Jersey has recognized the clear injustice involved in the fact that 40% of the people in jail in the state were there only because they were too poor to afford bail. While at the same time, they realized that potentially violent people were able to walk out of jail simply because they had more money. So as of January, the state of New Jersey abolished cash bail for most nonviolent offenders, substituting a system to monitor released defendants and to require prosecutors to bring cases more quickly. Now, this does not, obviously, remedy nearly all of the flaws in our criminal injustice system, but it is also clearly a step in the right direction, and that's good news. Next up, something I think of as good news. It may be a little thing in the grand scheme of things, but still, it's kind of a feel-good thing. Jimmy Carter and family leased 10 acres of land in Plains, Georgia, and arranged to put in a solar farm, which is now ready to provide 1.3 megawatts of power every year, which is more than half the electricity requirements of the entire town of Plains, Georgia. They followed that up by having 324 solar panels installed on the Jimmy Carter Presidential Library, which will provide about 7% of the library's power needs. Now, a little historical footnote. In 1979, then President Jimmy Carter installed 32 solar panels on the White House to provide some of the building's hot water. Ronald Reagan had them removed. All right, and under the heading, it could be under the heading of the saying, revenge is a dish best served cold, and with the subhead of, it's about time. We have the good news that former Sheriff Joe Arpaio, the self-styled America's toughest sheriff, whose specialty was bigoted arrests of Latinx, has been convicted of criminal contempt of court for his blatant refusal to obey a federal judge's order to stop his immigration sweeps. Now, while this is satisfying, it is unlikely that the 85-year-old Arpaio will ever see actual jail time, which is especially unfortunate considering that he never showed any mercy toward those that he targeted. Even so, and even considering that his crimes go well beyond contempt for federal courts, I still embrace the good news of this smackdown, at least of his arrogance. All right, on the other hand, though, we have some not good news. Okay, I have talked several times about a process called civil asset forfeiture. It's the corrupt outgrowth of the corrupt war on drugs, under which police can seize personal assets based on nothing more than their claimed belief that those assets either are related to illegal drug activity or were purchased with the proceeds of illegal drug activity. They can do this even if they have no basis for any charges being brought against the person holding the asset. What's more, at that point of seizure, the burden of proof gets flipped. And if you want your stuff or your money back, you have to somehow prove that that asset was not connected to any criminal activity. And no, I am not exaggerating about this, not one tiny bit. And remember, this is a civil matter, not a criminal one. So you have no right to an attorney, and any legal costs involved have to come out of your own pocket. The result is that most victims don't even try to get their stuff back because they don't have the money to fight it, or because the legal costs involved in getting it back would be more than the asset is actually worth. It is a horrendous practice, which over the past 3 years, 24 states have moved to curtail, often by requiring that before any asset can be seized, somebody has to actually be convicted of something. But even with those limitations, there was a big loophole for the cops. It's called adoptive seizure, and it works this way. A state cop seizes your property and then transfers it to the federal government, which adopts the seizure, and the federal government then keeps the property under federal law, which obviously is unaffected by your state law. The feds then give 80% of the value of the seized asset to the state, and not even to the state's general fund, but to the cops and prosecutors. In other words, the feds were essentially paying the police to evade their own state laws. In 2015, then Attorney General Eric Holder effectively eliminated the adoptive seizure program, with the result that seizures under it dropped from 65 million in 1 year to 15,000 the next. All right, so what's the not good news here? On July 19th, Attorney General Jeff, I am not a racist, I swear I'm not Sessions, announced that the Department of Justice is reauthorizing adoptive seizures, reopening the door to the corruption and abuse that have marked this program since the very beginning. A coalition of constitutional and civil rights organizations have called on the Congress to quickly act on legislation to shut this down, but frankly, I'd say don't count on seeing that pass. All right, next up we have one of our occasional features. This is called For the Record, and it's where we go through several things rather quickly just to make sure that they get mentioned. So, for the record, the Trump administration has cut nearly $214 million from teen pregnancy prevention programs by ending grants to organizations across the country that are receiving them 2 years sooner than those grants are supposed to end. Some of the organizations receiving the grants were told that this was at the instigation of Valerie Huber. She's the new chief of staff to the Assistant Secretary for Health at the Department of Health and Human Services, and she favors abstinence-only education. This comes at a time when the teen birth rate is at an all-time low. It has been dropping steadily since about 1990 and is now about half of what it was then. It also comes in the face of a study showing that the entire 28% drop in teen pregnancy between 2007 and 2012 can be attributed to increased use of contraception. For the record, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson has ordered up a new mission statement for his department. The draft versions under review are similar to the old one, except for dropping any reference to promoting democracy or promoting a just world, a change that former senior State Department officials from both parties say is neither accidental nor inconsequential. Meanwhile, the State Department is closing the website www.humanrights.gov and moving its content to the easily remembered URL of www.state.gov/J/DRL. Next up, for the record, according to Al Bawaba, which is a news organization in Jordan, on August 1st, Israeli forces demolished the Bedouin village of Al-Araqib in the Negev region of southern Israel. It was the 116th time since 2010 the village had been leveled, the 8th time this year. Al-Araqib is one of 35 Bedouin villages considered unrecognized by Israel. According to the Association for Civil Rights in Israel, more than half of the approximately 160,000 Bedouins in the Negev live in one of these unrecognized villages. The villages were established in the wake of the 1948 war, with many Bedouins being forcibly removed to those villages in the ensuing 17 years. Now, more than 60 years after their founding, the villages remain unrecognized, which means they are unable to connect to the national water or electricity grid, and they are blocked from health and educational services. On the contrary, one time when Israeli courts found that a Jewish outpost, as they were called, a Jewish outpost called Amona in the West Bank, was in fact illegal. It was illegally built on land that actually belonged to the local Palestinians. The Israeli government tried every way it could to avoid having to remove those settlers. Amona was finally evacuated on February 1st of this year, almost immediately after which the Israeli parliament passed a law retroactively legalizing other such outposts, including those built on Palestinian land. For the record, a perfect example of how bad our media really is. On January 24th, U.S. News and World Report ran an article about the mass arrest of protesters at the Rump's inauguration. The headline was, and I'm quoting it here, "Inauguration mass arrest of protesters, journalists, a throwback with a familiar face, attorneys say," with a subhead of, "The city's interim police chief was found responsible in the past for violating protesters' rights, costing the city millions." Now, even though the article then was about the potential illegality of mass arrests without probable cause, it was illustrated with this picture of someone throwing a trash can through a store window. Now, what that actually had to do with the story, other than to prejudice readers against the protesters, wasn't clear. Okay, on June 21st, U.S. News and World Report ran an article about a suit alleging serious police misconduct in dealing with those same arrested protesters. It was headlined, and I'm quoting the headline, "Lawsuit, Police Laughed While Rectally Probing Inauguration Mass Arrest Group Didn't Change Gloves." The article was illustrated with that same image of somebody throwing a trash can through a window. And again, how that was connected to the substance of the story went unexplained. Finally, for the record, a new report released July 5th, the results of a cooperative research effort by Oil Change International, Friends of the Earth, the Sierra Club, and the World Wildlife Fund's European Policy Office, shows that the U.S. government provided about $6 billion annually in financial support to the oil, gas, and coal industries between 2013 and 2015, during the term, let it be noted, of the amazing Mr. O. That's over 4 times the amount that went to clean energy, which got only $1.3 billion a year. Okay, next we come to one of our regular features, one of the popular features around here. It's called the Clown Award, given as always for an act of meritorious stupidity. And we have someone who would have been a shoo-in this week, except that he ran afoul of one of my rules. So our runner-up, and I think soon to be retired from competition because it's so unfair to the other aspirants, our runner-up is Donald the Rump. And talking about the issue of pre-existing conditions and health insurance during an interview with the New York Times, he said, and I'm quoting, "You're 21 years old, you start working, and you're paying $12 a year for insurance." Yep, $12 a year. That's what the man said. Now, in fairness, in another interview, this one with The Economist, he set the figure at the princely sum of $15 a month or $180 a year. And ultimately, it actually turns out that the reason all this happened is because the Rump does not know the difference between life insurance and health insurance, which really isn't any better. But I have a rule, you can't be a clown 2 weeks in a row, so we have to move on. Fortunately, we do have a worthy candidate. So this week, the winner of the Big Red Nose is Lucien Wintrich, the White House correspondent for the right-wing conspiracy blog, The Gateway Pundit. He took offense at a picture of 3 people giving the finger to Mount Rushmore, fuming that, quoting, "They break into our country, steal resources, and then do this, and libs wonder why we are pushing for immigration controls." Wintrich was apparently too blinded by the sight of brown skin to notice that the 3 people in the picture are Native Americans. But what really secured the award was when he responded to a wonky headline of "Stupidest White House correspondent on internet tells Native Americans to go back to Mexico." He replied with, "And they should." That is a level of stupid that is painful to witness. Lucien Wintrich, just 29 years old and already more accomplished than many older than he at being a clown. And let's take a break. And here we are back. And we are back with our other regular feature. This is the Outrage of the Week. George Will, who isn't an intellectual but plays one on TV on behalf of the mouth breathers of the right wing, wrote some years ago that, quoting him, "Back to 1900 is a serviceable summation of the conservatives' goal." It appears that the White House of Donald the Rump is taking that almost literally with its increasingly obvious intent to roll back the social progress of decades. I've got some examples here that seem disparate, but actually there is a uniting theme which you will come to see. For one of these examples, for obvious, there was the occasion the morning of July 26th when His High Orangeness tweeted that, quoting him, "After consultation with my generals and military experts, be advised that the United States government will not accept or allow transgender individuals to serve in any capacity in the U.S. military. Our military must be focused on decisive and overwhelming victory and cannot be burdened with the tremendous medical costs and disruption that transgenders in the military would entail." Okay, to start that off, the part about the consultation is a blatant lie. Top military brass were blindsided by the announcement and had no idea it was coming. In fact, they were sufficiently against it, or at least resistant to it, that General Joseph Dunford, who chairs the Joint Chiefs of Staff, issued a note Thursday to all service chiefs, commanders, and enlisted military leaders, saying that U.S. policy on transgendered individuals in the military has not and will not change until Secretary of War Mattis receives the Rump's policy direction and Mattis decides how to implement it. And disruption that transgenders in the military would entail? Is he really that disconnected from the real world? Is he really that wrapped up in his own fantasy land that he doesn't even know that there are already transgender individuals in the military? The number is unknown, but a RAND study suggested there could be over 6,000, and a UCLA study estimated there are nearly 9,000 on active duty and 6,000 more in the Guard and Reserve. Now, this whole issue supposedly arose in the House a few weeks ago. An amendment was introduced to a defense authorization bill that would ban funding for gender reassignment surgery or any treatments for transgender active duty personnel. The Copper leadership was shocked when a group of 24 mostly moderate Republicans joined 190 Democrats and killed the bill. So they turned to Trump for help in getting this bill through. He didn't hesitate. In fact, he went further than they wanted. But the claim that the issue is about the cost of such treatment is belied first by the reality that the actual costs involved is about $1.2 million a year, an amount of money the government could save if the Rump just skipped one golf weekend. And it's belied more importantly by the comments on the issue. For example, Gopper Trent Franks said, and I'm quoting, "It's not so much the transgender surgery issue as much as we continue to let the defense bill be the mule for all of these social experiments that the left wants to try to foist on the government. And it seems to me that if someone wants to come to the military, potentially risk their life to save the country, that they should probably decide whether they're a man or a woman before they do that." In other words, it's not about money, it's not about social experiments, it's about hatred and fear of transgender people. But of course, transgender people are not the only one on who the clock is to be turned back. The same day as that infamous tweet, the Department of Justice submitted a brief in a federal lawsuit claiming that a major piece of civil rights legislation banning discrimination in employment based on sex doesn't protect homosexuals from workplace discrimination. The law is Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and besides sex, it bans discrimination based on race, color, national origin, or religion. The case involved here is that of Zarda v. Altitude Express. And the case started in 2010 when Donald Zarda sued his former employer, claiming he'd been fired because he was gay. When the case got to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, the court invited outside parties to weigh in. Now note, this is important to note this, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC, the largely autonomous federal agency which is charged with enforcing anti-discrimination laws, had already filed a brief in support of ZADA and has held that position for several years, arguing that anti-gay discrimination is based on sex stereotyping and therefore is discrimination based on sex. Well, the DOJ of Jeff, I'm not a bigot, really I'm not, Sessions, didn't care. Despite not being a party to the case, despite the fact that the EEOC had already spoken, and despite the fact that the department normally doesn't weigh in on a case between private parties, they came storming in to say, never mind what the EEOC says, they don't represent the government, even though that's their job. No, listen to us, and we say that Title VII only applies to cases where men and women are treated differently, which is the narrowest possible interpretation of the law. So it doesn't cover sexual orientation, so Donald Zarda and every other gay or lesbian worker in the workforce in the entire country is just screwed. Because, like George Will said, 1900. The DOJ argued the idea that Title VII does not cover sexual orientation has been settled for decades, and there was an overwhelming judicial consensus. This is apparently based on 2 cases from the 2000s and some others that were from before Lawrence v. Texas, which struck down state sodomy laws in 2003, and Obergefell v. Hodges, which legalized same-sex marriage in 2015. In other words, cases from the good old days. The argument also ignored the fact that in April of this year, the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals ruled in favor of a lesbian who made the same argument of protection under Title VII. Omar Gonzalez-Pagan, a staff attorney at Lambda Legal, said, quote, "There is no role for the DOJ to play in the ZADA case, and the Injustice Department was, again quoting, going out of its way to harm LGBT people." But then again, LGBTQ people are, of course, not the only ones standing between the hate mongers and their dream of a purified white nation. There are also all those icky brown people, all those illegal human beings, those people whose existence is against the law. I noted just 2 or 3 weeks ago that ICE agents, according to a directive from the head of its enforcement unit, are told to take action against any undocumented immigrant that they encounter while on duty. Not that they may take action, which at least implies still some level of discretion, but that they will do so. ICE apparently is taking that to heart, to the point where, as Splinter News put it, ICE is just arresting everyone. A practice that prompted one ICE agent turned whistleblower to say, "The plan is to take them back into custody and then figure it out. We're doing it because we can." Here's an example. ICE recently announced that its officers had arrested 650 people, including 38 minors, in a 4-day operation in late July. But it turned out that over 450 of the people arrested, over 70%, weren't the ones that ICE was looking for in the first place. They just happened to be in the vicinity when the ICE police showed up. The point is, the goal here is very simple. Label all undocumented immigrants as animals, as violent, as criminals, even though they commit crimes at a lower rate than native-born citizens. Claim they all go on welfare, for which they are not eligible and never have been. And otherwise dehumanize them in any way that you can, so that you don't have to care who you deport, so long as you can eject foreigners, eject them, eject the other, eject the not us, eject the not white. But then it develops that the other has an even wider application, because right now the U.S. grants about 1 million green cards per year. A green card marks a grant of permanent legal residence status in the United States. The number of green cards issued in a year is a measure of the legal immigration that year. Over the past half century, U.S. immigration laws have permitted a growing number of immigrants to come to the country to work or to join relatives who are already living here legally. On August 7th, the Rump endorsed a new Senate bill intended to cut that legal immigration in half. Not only that, the same bill also proposes to completely end a visa diversity program that has awarded 50,000 green cards a year out of last year 14 million applicants, which go mostly to areas in the world that traditionally do not have many immigrants in the United States, such as recently, I would say significantly, Africa. And the bill caps refugee levels at the heartless level of 50,000 a year. Under the bill, a new immigration system would award points to green card applicants based on factors such as English ability, education levels, and job skills. Now note that while a rudimentary command of English is necessary to become a citizen, it has never been a requirement for a green card. And this new system would favor English speakers over others, trying to create a de facto version of what the U.S., in fact, has never had, an official language. It also favors more educated applicants and those with specialized skill, leading to the ultimate point, as noted by Kevin Appleby, the Senior Director of International Migration Policy for the Center of Migration Studies. He called the bill, quoting him, part of a broader strategy by this administration to rid the country of low-skilled immigrants they don't favor in favor of immigrants in their image. And what is that image? Well, here's a way you can tell. The anti-immigrant hate group, Federation for American Immigration Reform, said it looks like the perfect bill. White nationalist William Johnson called it a viable first step. And neo-Nazi Richard Spencer, president of the White Nationalist National Policy Institute, said the bill sounds awesome. Know them by the company they keep. Because when Senator Tom Cotton, one of the bill's sponsors, said that while immigrant rights groups might view the current system as a symbol of America's generosity, he sees it as, and I'm quoting, a symbol we're not committed to working class Americans. And when he says that, I, for one, am damn sure that the working class American that he was envisioning was not named Jesus or Letitia. Transgender people, gays and lesbians, undocumented immigrants, documented immigrants, all on the political chopping block for being other, for being not us, for being insufficiently, and I'm using the word in a social rather than a literal sense here, being insufficiently white. If rights must be denied, if families must be ripped apart, if dreams must be crushed, then in the minds of those harshly, cruelly pursuing a nostalgia for a whiteness that never truly existed and a national sense of commonality that existed only because of the oppression of other voices, so be it. And you, back into the closet. You, back where you came from, or at least back into the shadows. And you just keep out. It is a denial of who we are, a denial of who we have become, a denial of what we can be, a denial of what could, in the best possible sense of the term, be considered American. It is small, it is bigoted, it is a project of timorous, fearful people trembling in the face of the future. It is a project not bounded, not defined by these examples, but is illustrated by them. And were it not driven by powerful people who fear the loss of their privilege, it would be an occasion for sorrow and pity. But it is driven by powerful people with positions and privileges to protect. And as a result, it is a source not of pity, but of outrage. Finally, for this week, after all of that, we have a footnote. On July 17th, the Department for the Protection of the Fatherland announced that it will allow for a one-time increase of up to 15,000 H-2B non-immigrant visas through the end of the 2017 fiscal year. Because after consulting with the Secretary of Labor, DHS Secretary John Kelly determined that there were not enough U.S. workers who are willing, qualified, and able to fill temporary and low-wage non-agricultural jobs, including landscaping, construction, and hospitality, quote, to satisfy the needs of some American businesses. We don't have enough of the very people they're trying to keep out. All right, that's it for this week. We are done. We will be out of here. We will see you again next week. In the meantime, you try to stay cool in the August weather, and you just have the best week that you possibly can. And until now, and as always, peace.